The Bob Murphy Show, episode 418.
There's a tidal wave coming. What you gonna do?
Get ready for another episode of The Bob Murphy Show, the podcast promoting free markets, free minds, and grateful souls. It's your source for commentary and interviews conducted by a Christian and economist. Now here's your host, Bob Murphy.
Hey everybody, welcome back to The Bob Murphy Show. We have got another fun episode for you today. I am speaking with Professor Steve Keen, who is a maverick in the economics profession. He picks fights with everybody on social media, so you can understand why I was attracted to him. And joking aside, we share an interest in the history of economic thought. And even though Steve is far more interventionist in his policy prescriptions than I am, I mean, it'd be hard not to be more than me since I'm an anarchist. We, for example, appreciate what the UK Cambridge people were doing in the so-called Cambridge Capital controversy. Okay. And we both agree that like Paul Krugman doesn't know what the heck he's talking about. And he's bluffing when he tells people, oh yeah, you don't need to worry about the Capital controversy. That was just a bunch of smoke and mirrors. Okay. So anyway, why I have Steve on for this particular conversation is I recently saw he had posted a critique of the MMT camp, and in particular Warren Mosler, because in Mosler's seminal work, which is called The Seven Deadly Innocent Frauds, and by the way, that title is interesting. What Mosler is saying is these things are false claims that mainstream economists and, policy wonks or whatever will try to convince you of. And they're deadly, but they're innocent, meaning these people actually believe what they're telling you. Like when they say the government's broke because look at all these obligations it has or whatever, or that, the government, in order to spend money, it needs to tax people first. Otherwise, how would the government, any money the government has, it first got for the taxpayers. Those are things that Mosler thinks are fraudulent claims. But he said, and they're very important, that, it's critical the public learns that, no, these guys are telling you falsehoods. But Mosler also says it's not that they're all evil. They actually believe this nonsense. Okay. So anyway, one of the things in that book that Mosler goes over is he says the conventional worry about the trade deficit is also a fraud. That actually, if you think about it, the fact that like the Japanese want to send us cars and we send them $100 bills, either literally paper, but more realistically is electronic deposits. Okay, that's a good trade. Why am I worried about that? They send us cars and TVs and whatever, and we send them electronic zeros and ones that our government since 1971 can create at will. What the heck do we care about that? That's awesome. If they're suckers enough to do it. Okay, so that's the thrust of it. And you might recognize that, oh yeah, on that score, the MMTers, at least as led by Warren Mosler, sound just like libertarian economists. They sound like, whatever, Phil Magnus mocking the Trump people. And so it's interesting that Steve Keen, who is not a big fan of right-wing Republicans, generally speaking, came out swinging, saying that no, Mosler is wrong on trade deficits. And you know who actually makes some good points is Stephen Moran, the head of Trump's Council of Economic Advisors. Okay, so it's just like, whoa, the enemy of my enemy is my trolling partner. So anyway, it was just interesting. I thought that was funny. And also, too, besides the merits of the argument intellectually, the fact that Steve would stick his neck out and give a qualified defense of some of the stuff that Trump's economic advisors are saying when both right and left love to mock them. And oh my gosh, these guys are either complete morons or they've sold their soul just to curry favor with this nut job Trump, right? So that's the standard narrative in U.S. politics, and I'm assuming around the world. And so again, I thought it was fascinating that Steve Keen is coming out, sticking his neck out to get a bunch of scorn heaped on him. And I saw that did happen from both anti-Trump people and pro-MMTers, who are often the same people. Okay, so that's all what we're talking about in this episode. It should go without saying, Steve is going to start, as you'll hear in a moment, by explaining the limited scope of his critique. So Steve actually is sympathetic when Warren Mosler says the government budget deficit isn't a problem. And I disagree with Steve on that, right? So again, we're all just trying to be precise here and say what we agree with and what we don't. And it's not just my team and your team kind of thing. So I don't pick a fight with Steve on that. I just let it go. I'm letting him clarify his own view, his own position. Okay, last thing. In the show notes page for this episode, again, you're listening to bobmurphyshow.com/418. I will give a link if you want to get more of Steve's material. He has a 9-part online lecture series that it just keeps restarting after the 9th week. It goes back to week 1. It's live. It's not just like canned lectures. Like he logs in and you're listening to him live. And it looks like it's a link to his book, which it is. There's like a free book you can get, but then that's the prelude to, hey, sign up for Steve Keen's course. All right, so I'm just explaining what that is in the show notes page if you're curious to learn more about Steve. Last thing I'll say is Steve did give me access to the course, but with my traveling, whatever, I have not yet logged in, so I cannot say whether, yes, I've attended it and it's awesome, or I would skip it for you. I don't know. So it's up to you. But if you like what he's doing here in the interview, check out his course. Okay. With that long-winded introduction, here we go, folks. Steve Keen talking about why Warren Mosler is wrong and the Trump economists are right when it comes to trade deficits. Well, Steve, welcome back to the Bob Murphy Show.
Good to be here, Bob.
So, folks, Steve, the maverick iconoclast that he is, likes to pick fights with everybody, and he has no team loyalty. He calls it like he sees it. I saw, Steve, that you recently had written a piece that was like a qualified defense of some of the economists working with the Trump administration on his trade policy, and you came out swinging hard against the MMTers on this particular issue. And so I thought, well, I got to have him on the show and talk about this stuff. So do you want to take it away and give your summary of what's going on?
Yeah, I mean, well, okay, let's first of all get it down. The modern monetary theory, the argument to make about government spending, I completely agree with. In fact, I can prove them using accounting concepts. So in the software I've invented for that purpose that I now called Ravel. So I can literally show that their argument about that is comparable to comparing their argument about government money creation to mainstream economics is like comparing Copernicus and Galileo to people who believe in a flat Earth. Okay, that's I've got complete respect for them on that front. But along with that same comment came when that was first originated from Warren Mosler in a book. I think he wrote it because he was actually going to run for president. You know that detail?
I didn't know that. So the book you mean is the 7 Innocent Deadly Frauds, or
that's
something like that?
That's the one. Yeah. Now one of the 7. So the one about the first one he has about government doesn't tax to spend, it spends to tax.
But actually, Steve, sorry, I sort of buried the lead there. No, I didn't know you think he was planning on running for office?
No,
I didn't know that.
I think I'm just, it's my historical recollection, but that isn't in fact the case. It's sort of an election manifesto to write that, and to some extent that explains where the attitude for trade comes from as well. Okay?
Right.
So that's probably worth including. So you had government doesn't tax to spend, it spends to tax, and that became the part of modern monetary theory that everybody knows, and I'm completely in agreement with, which is against the beliefs of the mainstream. So I've been defending them on that front, and I'm the only person who has developed a software package that can actually prove their point. Okay, so that's how far down I am on that side. But one of the other frauds that Mosler mentioned there was that about the trade deficit being a problem, because of course America has had a chronic trade deficit since about 1972, and it's risen to between 4 and 6% of GDP most years. Now, Mosler said if people, of course, were worrying about the trade deficit like they worry about the government deficit, frankly, not enough. People worry more about the government deficit than the trade deficit. But he's saying, don't worry about the trade deficit or the government deficit in that sense with the first part of MMT. Right. But what he's saying here is, the trade deficit's good. They send us machines. We send them effectively pieces of paper. We come ahead on the trade. And he actually said that we have been benefiting immensely, in capital letters, immensely.
Hey, Steve, I have it right here. You want me to maybe...
read it out.
Yeah, I'll just read some. I won't read the whole thing, but and this is from your post, Steve.
Yeah.
So, folks, this is Warren Mosler in his 7 Innocent Deadly Frauds. Mosler talking. Imports are real benefits and exports are real costs. Trade deficits directly improve our standard of living. Jobs are lost because taxes are too high for a given level of government spending, not because of imports. Later on, he says, in economics, it's better to receive than to give. Therefore, as taught in first-year economics classes, imports are real benefits and exports are real costs. And I'll just read one more here, Steve. Still quoting from Warren Mosler, folks. A trade deficit, in fact, increases our real standard of living. How can it be any other way? So the higher the trade deficit, the better. The mainstream economists, politicians, and media all have the trade issue completely backwards. Sad but true. We have the cars and they have the bank statement from the Fed showing which account their dollars are in. Okay, so, and like you're saying, Steve, this seems to dovetail with his other, MMT view, like, it's not hard for us to create money, and so isn't it better if Japan sends us a point? We got cars, and we just send them money that we can just create, so what's the big deal?
I think that's a pretty sensible interpretation of the logic that lies there. But the trouble is, logic is something that matters to me. And that's why with the MMT case on government spending, I look at it, it's 100% watertight in terms of the logic of double entry bookkeeping. Okay, so I'm cool on that one. This one looks like wisdom and is actually childish. And the basic reason is that there's a whole lot of reasons as to why. But like your point about saying we are the money creator, so everybody has to use our money for trade. That means we can effectively benefit from what is known in the trade as seigniorage. Okay? We create the paper, we can then spend it, and that's to our benefit. Okay. Now, in that sense, yes, he's right. Okay, that's a what do you call it? A exorbitant privilege of being the currency that's used for international trade. Okay, so if you're doing it as a candidate for the president of America, and you've got the same attitudes that America seems to have to the rest of the world on everything, pardon me, speaking as an Aussie. You dominate, use power, etc., etc. There's no subtlety to your empire. There's confusion. There's Disneyland elements to it, but there's no subtlety. We're going to go in and they don't quite invade like the Mongols used to do, okay? But there's a lot of self-interest in America's foreign policy, put it that way. So here's another taste of that. He's saying, we're benefiting. Let's take advantage of it. Now, that's fine when what you're writing is a document for Americans to vote for you as the leader of America for the benefit of America, yada, yada, yada. When this becomes an international concept, okay, can you hang on to the same idea? So if it is actually, even if it is true that exports are a benefit and imports are a cost, what's the sum of all imports and exports? 0, okay? If one country is running an export surplus with the rest of the world, then the rest of the world is running a deficit of precisely the same magnitude, dollar for dollar. Okay, it's either side of the coin, because one country's export is another country's import. Okay, so that means. Can
I stop you right there, Steve?
Yeah, dive in anytime.
Yeah, and so what's interesting, and partly also why I wanted to have you on here, is because I've been sort of rethinking my coalition with my fellow libertarian economists, because Mosler's point there is something that typically American libertarian economists often deploy also, because as you can imagine, in our context, we often get hit with, oh my gosh, the trade deficit's terrible and we need to have tariffs. And so since we don't like taxes, we want to come up with a reason that, no, we don't need tariffs. And so a go-to move is what Mosler just did, is what, American,
that's Larry Summers has said the same thing.
And so my thing to the libertarians is to say, okay, so then does that mean you're going around to all the countries that have trade surpluses and telling them they should have a tax on exports
because after all, if imports are obviously, or if a trade deficit's obviously good for your people, then a trade surplus must be bad. But I don't see you saying that. Right.
Yeah. So that, and this is why, I mean, that this to contrast to the point of MMT that I agree with, and that is logically double entry bookkeeping, mathematically correct. Government creates money when it spends. Okay, that's going against the profession. So in general, the rest of the profession says, "Oh, government money creation is A, it's terrible. B, we should always have a balanced budget. B, it'll only cause inflation, et cetera, et cetera." You get out the garlic when people start talking about running a government deficit, okay? So they're going against that, and it's 100% opposition to the mainstream belief, and I think they're right and the mainstream is wrong. But in this case, they're exactly consistent with the mainstream, because the mainstream will say, like Larry Summers saying the same thing. You Austrian, as you say, that's a similar sort of thing. You don't need to worry about it. Don't regulate the damn thing. Whatever you do, regulations.
Milton Friedman has lots of videos and stuff where he says very similar things.
But the trouble is, when you get to the level of international behavior, if there is a zero-sum game, then if you want to act as a citizen of this planet, then you have to concede there's a zero-sum game, and you do something to mean that one countries can't exploit others. Okay. So rather than behaving like the Roman Empire of today, and whatever Rome benefits Rome is fine, and if it screws other people, who cares about it? That's not how Rome behaved at all. We talk about Pax Romana. A large part of that was maintaining order. They were exploiting the colonies, but they for sure, but they wouldn't be ripping them off in the way that this argues. So if you actually believe that imports are a benefit, exports are a cost, the sum of all is zero, you should support a system that minimises trade deficits and trade surpluses. For the reason, because your deficit causes somebody else's surplus, and vice versa. Right. Okay. Now they haven't done anything like that. There's been no discussion. The idea has been lifted from the days when it was a case made for somebody who was running for the president of the United States, to where it's a general discussion of economic policy across the whole planet. And so in that case, it's not just Americans who are pumping MMT, it's Europeans, Chinese, et cetera, then it would be incumbent upon them to develop a system to minimise trade imbalances, even if they're right that imports are a benefit and exports are a cost. And I'm not going to say that's wrong, but I'm going to say it's a terrible basis on which to plan to develop your economy over time. And that's where, and in fact, I can prove that it's a terrible idea using double entry bookkeeping, which I'll hit you with at some point. But fundamentally, the benefit's the other way around. Okay, the exporting nation wins, not the importing nation, when you're exporting manufactures. And that's what you're looking at with China. They're exporting manufacturers to you. You're sending them pieces of paper back. Look at the progress, the relative progress of America versus China over the last 40 years. And even though you've got to say that China obviously had a sort of advantage in rate of growth of starting from a very, very low level, they've maintained a rate of per capita economic growth which is unparalleled in human history. And people, when you look at it, it's still, even for me, when I'm a fan of what China's been doing, because I went there 40 years ago and saw the plan in development and thought it would work. But it's crazy. They've been growing at 8% per annum per capita for 40 years. Okay? Now, that people that normally can't think in terms of the exponential function, you divide 8 into 72 and you work out that's, it's roughly 9 times, which means they're doubling every 9 years. So for an ordinary Chinese, given the income distribution issues of course, they've not got Chinese billionaires and they didn't exist under Mao. So there's lots of wealth being made, but also the average Chinese person has seen their standard of living double less than every decade. Now, you imagine what that does for your belief in your own social system, of course, but it also shows that, they must be doing something right. Now, according to MMT, they're doing something massively wrong. They're running a trade surplus. So how much faster would they be growing if they weren't running one, it becomes absurd. America's been growing, the per capita rate there is 1.7% per year. That doubles every 40 years. Okay. And we've seen how much it's been skewed in terms of distribution of income as well. The average American doesn't feel they're getting better off, and that's why they voted for Trump to a large degree. So China's the argument that you win by importing and lose by exporting is true at an instant in time. Okay. But it's not a guide as to how you should develop over time.
Yeah, maybe this is an appropriate point, Steve, for me, just to the point I've been making to, again, my libertarian buddies or, fans who repeat this slogan or this perspective is to say, okay, apply that logic to a household. And according to you, consumption, spending money on consumption, like the goods you're getting, that's the benefit, and the money you're spending is the other way around. Look at it in barter terms. That the work you do is the cost, and there is a certain this utility of labor, blah blah blah, and the consumption you get is the benefit, and that is true. But you wouldn't therefore say so. The ideal thing for households to do is to consistently consume more than their income every year, and that's really the mark of a wisely run household. Even though yes, there is a certain fundamental sense in which the reason you work is to be able to consume. Yeah, I get it. But you still, so anyway, and you would never apply that at the household level, and you would never say clearly the households that are living above their means by consuming more than their income in a typical year, those are the ones that we should follow and pattern ourselves after that. No, it's the other way around. And for some reason at the national level,
that's one time a household analogy makes eminent sense, because as you say, if you do that, you go bankrupt. Okay, you can't maintain it. And the only reason America doesn't have that same fate is because it produces the currency we use for international trade. Right. And that comes back to the thing of saying we're exploiting seigniorage, we're exploiting the power that we have for our own benefit. But that, that the whole world can't do that.
Right.
So But the point about development over time, this is probably the most important point, and this unifies with why mainstream economic trade theory, comparative advantage, is also, even if it were true, which I'm going to argue it's not, but even if it were true, it's an incredibly bad guide as to how you should develop over time. And it comes back, I'm going to use another household analogy here. Mm-hmm. Okay. It is in terms of my personal utility. Okay. I get more utility by lying in a beanbag, getting stoned and drinking fine wine while listening to the Beatles than I do by going to the gym. Mm-hmm. Okay. Okay. So does that mean that lying in a beanbag, getting stoned, drinking wine and listening to the Beatles is how I should develop over time? Okay. No, I'll have a body that looks like a beanbag in rapid succession. I'd be better off going to the gym, balancing the two. Gym 3 days a week, then the couch routine 1 day a week. So allocating existing resources more efficiently, in other words, in terms of your utility, is not the way you develop over time. And this is a very profound mistake which permeates economic theory in general, not just MMT, and that is what's called the ergodic fallacy. Have you heard of ergodic?
Ergodic? E-R-G-O-D-I-C?
That's the one, yeah.
I've heard of ergodic, but I've never heard of the fallacy, so no, I don't know.
Well, the fallacy is that the world is ergodic.
Okay.
That's the fallacy. Okay? Because, the definition of ergodic, can you hit me with your definition of ergodicity?
I'm not going to be able to do it, no.
Okay, well, I'll do it back. I wanted to give you, in case we had a difference there. Mathematically, an ergodic system is one where the average across space is the same as the average across time. Okay. Now, that's hard for most people to comprehend, but what it means in practical terms is that if a system is ergodic, then rather than having to work out the really complicated issue of what happens to it over time, you can just take the average at a point in time and take probabilities.
Okay.
So you can substitute probability analysis for complicated dynamic analysis. Okay?
So sort of like cross-sectional versus longitudinal?
Yeah, cross-sectional versus through time. Yeah. And it's a very common assumption in economics that that's okay. Okay. Mm-hmm. We all do it all the time. So if you look at the advice that's given in a finance textbook and they set up the questions about expected returns and so on, they'll give students problems like this. I'm going to give you, here's you gamble $100, and if you get heads and a coin toss, you get 150. If you get tails, you get 60. Work out the expected value and tell me whether you should do the experiment or take the gamble or not. Now, You want to do it, or shall I on that one?
Go ahead. I don't do arithmetic when the
It's
camera's
simple.
on me.
It's simple. 50% of 150 is 75.
Right.
50% of 60 is 30. 75 plus 30 is 105. You've gambled 100. You're $5 ahead. The textbook would fail you, or the teacher, the exam would fail you if you didn't give that answer in a standard economics or finance course. And it's wrong, because it works if you can actually do the bet across space. Okay. But the reason you're asking the question is, I want to know how to maximize my value over time. Okay. So you're thinking, oh, really complicated to work through time. I'll just take the space average. And then if the space average is positive, that's the good thing to do over time. Now you can, in that coin toss example, work out the time average in a simple example, because if you put the space average is you bet $100 at a point in time, and you do it like you have like a $1 each on 100 tables. You put $1 down, $1.50, 60 cents, bang, the whole lot. You get it $105. You come out ahead. Okay? That's across space. You then say that's going to apply through time too. No, it's not, because imagine now you put $100 down on one table, and you bet everything you get out of the gamble in the next gamble. So you toss a head, you get 150. You put that into the bid, you get toss a tail, you get 90, because you're getting not the arithmetic average, which is what you work across space, but the geometric average. Yep. Okay, so if you tossed 50 consecutive pairs of heads and tails, you would end up with 72 cents from your $100. Basically, wipe yourself out.
So the listeners of this podcast, Steve, will know this because I went through. I've done some consulting for Mark Spitznagel. And this is a big thing. He's got a book that hits this, and I exaggerated the numbers just to make it even simple. This to say,
this is actually a great new book I can just recommend. That's been produced by the experts on this topic.
Okay, great.
Ole Peters. That's great. That's come out of their argument there. And the point is, you can't use expected value as a way of working out what's going to maximize your money over time. In fact, in its instance, you use what's called the Kelly formula.
Yep.
And I imagine people are familiar with that. So. What economists are doing, this is both modern monetary theory and also neoclassicals with the idea of comparative advantage, is saying, because if you allocate things more efficiently across space, that's the best development process for you over time. No, it's not. Okay, so the classic thing that people have always said, if Japan specialized in what its comparative advantage was, when it first met the Americans in 1868 or after World War II, it would have been specializing in silk. That's not what they did. So all the countries that have successfully developed have defied the arguments of comparative advantage, and that's something all through the literature. If you look at all the attempts to prove comparative advantage, the great puzzle is, it doesn't seem to work. I wonder what's wrong with the real world that means our theory doesn't work. Embarrassing stuff. So what I see with the modern monetary theory bringing this argument forward is they're making a similar mistake. They're thinking that you can get a guide about what to do over time by looking at what gives you the best deal at a point in time.
Okay.
And that is simply wrong.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So do you want to, let me Steve, just again for the listeners, make sure they got that. So what I was saying is I exaggerated the numbers, just like you're flipping a coin, and the game is, if it comes up heads, you get 4 times your wager. If it comes up tails, you get 0. Like they just take your money. Yeah. So still, the expected value is positive. You want to play the game. If you had 1,000 of your agents going to the casino, and you split your bankroll among them, you want them to play. But if it's you, one guy playing that same game sequentially, no, with probability 1, you're going to have 0 if you keep playing that game.
That's right. So, ultimately, you're going to get a 0. There's no damn chance. Right. So it's a similar, more exaggerated, the same basic insight. Right. So what
And so just your analogy that, or tying that to the comparative, you're saying they're making a similar mistake that, right now the best thing to do is I don't know if you've seen, but Orrin Cass has been pushing this stuff, pushing back against the libertarian economist. And he got, do you know who Michael Boskin is? He was, I
think I know. It's sent some stuff.
Okay, yeah. Cass, and he apparently, I think this is a valid quote that Orrin Cass likes to trot it out to embarrass him. But apparently he said, like at a press conference, something like, potato chips, computer chips, what's the difference? Meaning,
I remember that.
We specialize in whatever, gives us the most comparative, is our comparative advantage right now. And we don't need to lead the world in, computer chips or whatever. Who cares?
Yeah.
So anyway, that's what your point is, that like doing something that optimizes for right this moment might not be the thing sequentially going forward. So
yeah,
okay.
it's the wrong advice,
Okay.
and that's like when I'm annoyed at MMT on that front, frankly, because I hate friendly fire. I don't mind fighting, as you know, staunch Austrians,
Right.
neoclassicals definitely, Marxists, take them all. Fighting bloody MMT over this is a pain in the effing ass. So I'm annoyed that I've been dragged into this situation. But I don't want to see a bad idea become part of a otherwise sensible piece of argument. So I'm taking it on.
Sure. Okay. So what's the best way? Is it now time to dive into the minutia with your tables, or what do you think?
The dreaded simulation. Yeah. Okay. Let's see if people can cope with this. So what I'll do is, let's see, I get my thing up to full screen. I'll start with just one window, because this has actually come out of working with one of the wonderful advocates of MMT, Dirk Entz, who's a German academic. And he's now working for the European Parliament and is therefore analysing the European system quite closely. And he's probably the expert on the structure of the euro. And a remarkable thing that's come out of working with him is that the European Central Bank is not a central bank, because a central bank normally has bank accounts of private banks. Okay. Well, you'd imagine the same structure applies to the ECB. You'd think that all the ECB would be the bank for the whole continent, and then each of the national central banks would have an account at the Bundesbank. There's only one problem with that: they don't. Okay, so there's no system that involves the ECB that lets the ECB control in any sense whatsoever the spending of any of the central banks and the treasuries in the rest of the European system. So that's not how the rules of the Maastricht Treaty are applied. They're applied by the fiscal rules. And this is coming out and saying, look, you're above 3% of the deficit, or your debt's above 60% of GDP. And then we've got to therefore tell you how to rewrite your budget so you don't do it again, you naughty country. That's the sort of thing they do. But the actual structure of the system is, in that sense, the internal structure of the European Union is identical to global trade, with only one difference, and that is that there is only one currency. Okay, so what you can do is look at transfers between one EU country and another, and you don't get the complication of having to worry about currency conversion. Where does that happen? Because it's all the euro. Okay? That's made setting this up much, much simpler, and it's the way that I'm going to attack this in an academic article at some point. So now, can I share my screen now?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So this is showing a simplified, obviously, version of the German monetary system in terms of government money creation. So there's a thing called Target 2, which is it's a requirement of the euro system that you have an account called Target 2, and you must have both assets and liabilities. That's quite weird. And when we first set the model out, nothing turned up in the liability column. But in a sense, Target 2 is the way in which transfers occur between different banks in the European system. So first of all, let's have a look at government spending. So I've got government spending going from the Treasury to the German Treasury to the banks in the German system. So Treasury account goes down, the accounts of the reserves go up. And then the same for interest payments. Bond sales give a flow in the opposite direction, and tax gives a flow in the opposite direction. So that's all standard, the structure of accounting according to modern monetary theory, pretty much stock standard. Then what you have is exports and imports. And we spoke, because we want to show we're including the services sector as well. We put them financial flows from Greece to Germany. So financial flow from Greece to Deutschmark. That's going to increase reserves in the German system and increase the Target 2 assets that Germany has. And the opposite, when you have a flow from Germany to Greece, that's going to reduce reserves and reduce the Target 2 assets. So what Ravel lets me do is cascade through the financial system. So that's seeing it from the point of view of the central bank, now about the private banks themselves. Well, when the government's, and this is where MMT makes its correct break with mainstream thinking, government spending creates deposits. Okay, taxation reduces deposits and reserves. That the funds that are created in the reserves are what are used to buy the bonds. Okay? So there's no fundamental borrowing going on in the sense that you and I have to borrow. It's a different story. But then coming down to this, what happens to the financial flows? Flows from Greece to Germany increase deposits in Germany. Okay, that should be bleedingly obvious.
Right.
So, okay. And then spending out of deposits in Germany reduces deposits in Germany. So in that sense, if your financial flows from Greece are greater than your financial flows to Greece, you have more money in your economy. Okay. In effect, your government money creation is bleeding to the economy from which you're doing an import. Now, what I then have an extremely simple way of turning this into a mathematical model, sort of thing I can do unravel. I've got the turnover of money in Germany creating GDP. That's straight, Milton Friedman velocity of money argument. And then I have a fraction that that the government spends, and a fraction that it taxes, which determines spending and taxation. And if there's a gap between the two, you run a deficit, and you have to issue bonds equivalent to the deficit plus interest on existing already outstanding bonds. And interest on outstanding bonds is the interest rate times how many bonds are currently held in this case, by the banking sector. And then for simplicity, just to mean that I can just leave the banking sector's in dynamics with the non-bank sector aside for a moment, I'm just assuming that the banks spend all the interest they get. But that's a simplifying assumption. I could get rid of it and the results would not change. So then I have each country importing as a fraction of its GDP. So the German tendency to import as a function of its GDP, and the fraction for Greece the same inverse function. And then if you have them both doing the same level of importing and exporting, then you get the same GDP. But if the fraction that Greece is importing rises, then Greece grows more slowly and Germany grows more rapidly. And if I push it far enough, of course, to where the trade deficit equals the government deficit, then your economy goes and totally tanks. So what that's showing, I know that's a pretty fast demo, but it's showing that a country that runs, I'll just stop sharing here, a country that runs a trade surplus grows faster. Okay. And that's therefore, rather than having this puzzle of why is it that China, which is being so stupid as to run a trade surplus, is growing 7 times faster than America, okay, the answer is it's not stupid, it's sensible. What it's doing, that's why it's nice to be able to leave out the currency exchange issue in this example, because I always get people trying to, they throw finance markets, finance markets, and bang, that's what Warren Mosley did when we first had a debate about it. Doesn't matter. Let's just take the confusion out. What it shows is if you're running a trade deficit, then part of your money creation, whether that's by the government sector or the private sector, is financing creation of money in another country. Mm-hmm. And so even in that sense alone, just looking at turnover of money, that's a reason why you're the country doing the exporting will grow faster. So the good advice about, let's take advantage of it. You get couches to lie and bottles of wine to drink and joints to smoke, I imagine, if you import those. I know America's producing its own
listening
these
to
days.
the Beatles. That's
while listening to the Beatles.
Yeah, that's going to enhance the whole thing.
Music, got to have the music there. So that's
it's probably like the White Album if you're doing all that stuff, not the early.
So something scrambled, definitely. Helter Skelter comes to mind. That's why it's just bad reasoning to argue that the trade deficit is good for you. You get an instantaneous benefit, but you stop investing, you stop developing your skill levels, and that's either the de-skilling of America has come out of that. And you would know you've seen the famous clip where Tim Cook is talking in, I think, an auditorium in China, talking about why does Apple produce in China rather than America? And like in the early days, definitely it was cheaper labor, no argument. But he said these days, if he wanted to hold a meeting of all the machine tool experts in America, he could probably, he wouldn't be sure that he could fill the auditorium he was speaking in. is that I wanted to have the same meeting of all the tool making experts in China, I'd need several football stadiums.
Oh, no, I haven't seen that clip.
It's fascinating, and it's dead true. I mean, have you been to China, mate? Have you visited at all?
No.
You haven't?
No.
Pardon the French, but why the F not? Go and check it out.
You've never been? Yeah. I should. Yeah. It's on my bucket list.
Absolutely. Huh?
Yeah.
You've got another 8 trips to catch up to me, I think.
Okay.
Maybe 6. I first went there in 81, 82, and I literally saw the country during the time of the trial of the Gang of Four.
Okay.
I took a bunch of journalists for a conference on a comparative journalism conference between Australia and China. It was the first time it's ever been done. It was the first conference Chinese journalists ever had with journalists from any other country. That was in January of 81, 82. And like the place, it was Mao suit world, okay? The trial was being broadcast through loudspeakers. The other side of Shanghai River was paddy fields. The side that you walked on had French and Russian influenced buildings, and then there were paddy fields, and there were also quite a lot of low-level industrial on the other side of the river. Now you go there, and it's like Disneyland on steroids. Unbelievable change in my lifetime. And I was there in 27. I'm now 72. So, it's just a tiny gap of time, 45 years worth, and it's transformed beyond belief. So people who, say exports are a cost, imports are a benefit, should go and see a country that decided to run a 4% of GDP export surplus consistently and see what they did with it.
Okay. Yeah, it truly is on my list. But as you said, though, Americans, we're very insular. So if I want Chinese food, I just go down to the local strip mall and I get.
Oh, mate. Okay. If you go to Beijing, I'll put you in touch with some of I haven't been in touch with for a long time, though. I've got a few young students. So I taught at the equivalent of, the French École Normale.
Yeah.
Okay. The equivalent of that is the Beijing Normal University. And I taught it there years ago before COVID. And the students there took me out to their favorite restaurants. You think you've eaten Chinese food, do you? Mate, you've got a culinary experience par excellence coming your way.
Obviously, folk, I'm being facetious, but yes. Yeah, definitely want to go.
Hey, everybody. Bob Murphy here with a quick tip for small business owners. If your business isn't showing up online, your competitors are getting the leads, and you're missing out. Well, that's where Persist SEO comes in. For over 15 years, they've been helping local businesses grow through SEO, paid ads, and the latest in AI-powered search optimization, so you stay visible and competitive in the digital age. Whether you're in home services, legal, or healthcare, Persist SEO delivers real results without locking you into long-term contracts or overwhelming you with tech jargon. Visit ineedseo.help or call 770-580-3736 to schedule your free consultation. That's ineedseo.help. Easy to remember, powerful for your business.
Okay, well, this is great stuff. Let me push back again. I mean, I totally followed your argument, obviously. Let me push back the first time pretending I'm an MMTer, and then the second time pretending I'm a standard mainstream economist.
Okay. Yep.
Just to get your reaction. So I think I'll go to Warren Mosler would say against what you just said is, well, sure, if there were some difficulty, like the political will or something to create adequate demand in the importing country. And so, yes, the fact that their money is leaking over to the other, to the exporters could be a problem. But if everyone's reading my book and they understand MMT, no, if there's any employment problem or production problem domestically, the government just needs to spend more. We have a job guarantee and blah, blah, blah. So what are you talking? How could it possibly hurt us if our GDP is not growing with potential? The potential is indicated by the structural, our technology and our worker skills and whatnot. The government could just run a bigger budget deficit. So what are you talking about?
That's perfect. I mean, you could actually you could sub for him if you had
I could pass the Turing test.
You could definitely, yeah, well and truly. Yeah, the problem is that this is treating money as fungible, which of course it is. If I give you $1 and somebody else gives you $1, you've still got $1. Okay. The question is, where does the money go to? Now, what I was doing in that extremely simple model is just having deposits, lumping everybody together in one basket. Now, if you think about the actual structure of the financial system and the actual number of people in the system and the number of companies and where the money goes and so on, then if the government is going to increase spending, and this might sound very Austrian to you, it's going to increase spending. It's going to do it generically across the country, like laying fertilizer over a whole field. When what you've got when you have companies coming up with new products, and like the classic, I think in America's case, from Japan with the subcompact scale cars. Okay, you had cars which you said, "Oh, geez, those are shitty cars. They're not well made," but there's no American equivalent. And I need a little run around for the city, so I'll buy one. And so what that meant was that money that you paid to buy those Toyotas, whatever they were, went back to Toyota, and Toyota then reinvested that money as an extra level of export of earnings over and above domestic earnings, developed their technology faster, stayed ahead of you, and about 10 years later, you weren't buying the cars because they were cheap and filled an unfilled niche. You were buying because they were damn good quality and filled an unfilled niche, and they actually took over a large part of the rest of the industry again. This is the whole sequence that Japan went through in its export-led industrialization until 1990, when the bubble economy came crashing down around them, and they've never recovered from that. But that's the dollar coming out of exports goes to a company exporting. It goes back to the source, and that can then mean they can invest at a higher rate and grow more rapidly. So it's not fungible. You cannot. This is the Austrian side of me talking here. The government cannot find the companies that would have succeeded in the export market. They can't identify them. Okay? How would the government of Tokyo know that this bloke called Toyota, who actually is a bicycle manufacturer who just got into business by strapping I think a lot of the original motorbikes in Japan were made by combining a Japanese bicycle frame with a small engine component taken from a fallen fighter jet.
Seriously?
Not fighter jet. Yeah, a lot of them apparently. The huge number of little. They think about the military detritus after World War II. I think in the case of Toyota. And certainly I've heard a lot of this about other companies at that stage. They were just using stuff that was scrapped by the military, turn it into a product. Okay. Now, how would the American administration of Japan at the time know that particular bicycle manufacturer is going to become one of the world's great car manufacturers? They can't know.
Right.
This is where the market, in that sense, has priority. Okay. You want the innovation to be done. Not all of it. I'm not going to go the full Austrian on you, okay? But you want the innovation to be done by companies which have got that drive and that balls to innovate. And the funding, if they make the dollars out of exports, they're going to grow and improve their technology. If you replace that with an equivalent amount of government spending, you're boosting the overall economy, but you're not doing anything to improve the investing prospects of Toyota.
Right.
So that's the fallacy in saying that it's completely fungible.
Right. Okay, and now let me flip and do the standard.
This is better than Bob karaoke.
Yeah,
this is Bob impressions. Okay,
right. Let me be like Larry Summers or something.
That's good. Okay.
And so he might say, what you've just shown there, Professor Keene, is you're sort of begging the question that you're saying at the outset that. What we're challenging is the notion that exports are good for the people, like, because there's a fundamental sense when you really think about the purpose of an economy that the imports are the good things and the exports are the regrettable necessary cost. And so you showing, but a country that devotes itself and runs big trade surpluses has a higher growing GDP. So what? We all know that net exports are a component of GDP. So you're just begging the question, why would I want GDP to rise if one component is this thing that we understand really consumption is the good thing and exports, or imports are the good thing and exports are the bad thing. And so actually that component of GDP is misleading. So yeah, we stipulate if you want GDP to go up, other things equal, have net exports. We're just saying that actually doesn't help the citizens of the home country in terms of their utility function.
Yeah, that's a pretty good clone. I'd give you Warren higher marks than your Larry.
Okay,
but still, both damn good. The argument. Hang on, pardon me. Bloody messages coming up on WhatsApp. The argument that that exports were already there, and why are you bothering to focus upon it, and so on, is first of all leaving out the issue, as I've said, the exports finance investment, and and if you're importing rather than producing domestically or exporting, then you're not doing that investment, which is going to affect your rate of growth over time. Again, this is static thinking, looking at GDP right now and treating the X as just being exports for this particular year, not seeing it's going to feed on and boost investments overall down the time. And that's what gives you what economists supposedly obsess about, which is the economic growth. So if you have to say, what is the argument in favour of trade deficits as a form of economic growth, you end up with the Mosler argument, we get the physical stuff which we can do things with, and they just get pieces of paper. Okay. Okay. Now, in fact, even again, I'm back to the MMT part of that argument. Right. They only go so far as seeing what happens with the foreign exchange, the central bank. They don't then see that foreign exchange is then owned by a domestic manufacturer who could ask for some of it to be kept in foreign exchange to buy assets back in your home country, which is Warren Buffett's criticism of trade deficits. But it could also be converted into local money and enable you to invest more. So that's part of the story. Another part, which might sound a bit esoteric, but I think it's absolutely fundamental. The standard model that neoclassical economists have, and Austrians, is if marginal cost rises. Okay? Your supply curve rises as you increase output. That's empirically contradicted by every last survey that's ever been done of manufacturing firms. Manufacturing firms, thank God, are not designed by economists. They're designed by engineers, and the engineer, when they design a factory, has the objective that it will reach maximum efficiency at full capacity. So the more just in terms of the design of the factory, as it approaches full capacity, the per unit variable cost will fall. They won't rise. They won't fall. They won't rise they won't fall dramatically. You won't, reduce them by 80%, but they'd be either constant or falling over the full volume of the firm. Your fixed costs, of course, per unit are always falling. Okay? So if you, and as a firm, you will not aim to use full capacity, because if you use full capacity and there's a marketing opportunity, you can't take advantage of it. So you're going to only have spare capacity. And on top of that, just looking, if you're building inside a growing economy, then when you commission a factory, it better not be at 100% capacity when you commission it, because you made it too small. Okay? Right. So there's all sorts of reasons why factories have excess capacity. Okay? Therefore, when they increase output, their per unit cost of production falls. So if they say we're at 80% with domestic demand and they can get to 90% with exporting as well, then that additional 10% actually has a higher profit margin, pardon me, at the same markup than the domestic stuff. You'll actually find that being discussed in the solar panel trade, of course China dominates. And I saw one of those, I think a show called Just Have a Think. Have you seen that show on YouTube? A lot of really good technical programs on the YouTube these days. And he made it talking about why do Chinese firms export so cheaply to Europe? Said because the profit margin is higher. And the reason is, with a higher capacity, those final units that are exported are a lower cost than the ones beforehand, and you make a larger margin. So rather than a firm losing by exporting, and it's often seen as they're making some sort of sacrifice to do it. No, they're getting a larger profit margin.
Right. Okay, great. And then also, just on that narrow point, I think you could just appeal to reality and say it's not the case that the increment in Chinese GDP from 1981, when I first went there, to today, is that the common people have the same standard of living, and it's just their export sector keeps growing. That no, like it's their whole economy, their domestic consumption and standard of living also has risen commensurately with GDP.
Yeah, it's breathtaking. And not just like Shanghai is obviously one of the two major things. Shanghai is like your Los Angeles and San Francisco all rolled into one. But that's 25 million people city. When I was going there the last time, about 2016 or thereabouts, I think, maybe 15, relationship was part of the story. My then girlfriend, who I met, she ran the public relations for the ITER complex in Paris, in France, pardon me. So a fairly bright cookie. But she lived in a city. She had as well as a place in France, she had a place in Dayang, which is a satellite city of the capital of Sichuan province, which is huge. Sichuan province, the capital, that's the biggest building in the world, is in that capital city. But her little town had a mere 4 million people. Quite small. And I've spent a few weeks there and played tennis with people and went walking around the streets. And in terms of what it felt like on the street at that stage, and that's like more than a decade ago, I felt more comfortable. I saw better conditions for a lot of people than a lot of American cities. So, and that was a decade ago. So they've doubled in per capita income since then. So it's much more widespread than people believe. And a large part of it isn't the sole reason, but I think they've benefited from the export surplus in the same way the Japanese did before them, the Koreans did, the Germans did. There's this pattern of running an export surplus for your manufacturing sector and industrializing and growing. There's partially a monetary argument behind it, which you can do, as I've shown, using my Ravel software.
And just this is a very colloquial point, but it buttresses what you're saying, that I remember when I was a little kid, a lot of like real cheap toys and things, if you turned them around, it would say either like made in Taiwan or made in Hong Kong. So like my idea of Hong Kong was not this bustling financial center powerhouse in 1985. Whereas now that's what I think of when I think of Hong Kong. So it's kind of showing. That's right. Okay. Well, maybe in the remaining time we have here, Steve, if we can sort of engage in some fun stuff, that the thing that surprised me at first, and then I realized, no, that's just how people are, is when your article dropped and you were making the rounds, I saw a bunch of MMT defenders telling you had misunderstood what their position was. And that, no, Warren Moser's not saying that imports are good and exports are bad. What are you talking about? So I don't know, do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, well, that's just hilarious. I mean, we spoke about this beforehand. I haven't actually got that particular comment in front of me, but one of them said, Warren didn't say that a trade deficit is a good idea. And so I quoted from the section you've literally got in front of you right now. I said, so when Warren said the bigger the trade deficit, the better, he didn't mean the bigger the trade deficit, the better.
Right.
And this, I mean, I've seen this with Marxists. I've seen it with neoclassicals and Austrians, and I'm now seeing it with MMT as well. Once the guru says something, that something is true. Okay, Warren made a mistake. Okay, Marx made a mistake. Samuelson made lots of mistakes. If you don't repeat everything that the person who founded your paradigm says. Sometimes they're going to be wrong, and this is one. So
I'm glad you didn't say Karl Menger made a mistake, because then I was going to have to end the interview.
I haven't read too much of him, got to be honest. But
okay, good.
Hayek and Mises and Rothbard, but not much. Okay, yeah. But this is the cult side of behavior. I think that's a manifestation of the human reality that you feel defined by your beliefs. So when somebody challenges your belief, you feel like you're being violated, and that's the way that I was being treated.
Right, and that's and again, that's partly why I wanted to have you on here, is because I like your perspective, and I felt that you don't just check and say, oh, wait a minute, what does my tribe think on this issue? I don't want to go off the reservation.
I failed initiation ceremonies.
Yeah.
God knows why.
So I guess, as we're coming down to a conclusion here, what's the big take? Are you saying, are you doing the flip side? Are you saying, yes, countries should adopt sorry, let me back up. Are you in favor of the kind of thing that the Trump administration is doing on the issue of trade? I know there's probably a lot they're doing. Not
on using tariffs to do it, but this is where you really have to control the extent to which trade imbalances exist. Okay,
Mhm.
and the pup we were sold by Milton Friedman and co. on, we went through the getting rid of the gold standard and so on, was flexible exchange rates will solve it all. We've had 50 years of them. What the heck's happened? Pardon the French.
Right.
There's still massive imbalances sustained by the same countries for decades. So, in Steve Moran's case, like, I didn't know what to expect when I read it. I'd never read him before, and I thought, being Trump's advisor, this could be interesting. And I found that it was. I quite enjoyed it. He actually basically said, look, the price system hasn't knocked out the imbalances. We have to do something about it. Now, the something about it's what I worry about, because tariffs and the craziness we've seen in the last couple of weeks is just a really destructive way to change anything, let alone your international physical goods and financial system. It's crazy. But Keynes came up with an idea the same way back at the time of Bretton Woods, when he came up with the idea of the International Clearing Union using a unit of account, but not a currency, that he called the Bancor. Have you seen that proposal?
A long time ago, so I don't remember the. Yes,
it's
I know Bancor's the thing Keynes proposed.
It's quite neat. So the ICU, which has different meanings these days, but International Clearing Union, that every country would have had an account there, and if you had to convert your domestic currency into ICUs to enable trade to occur. So you'd go dollar to ICU, ICU to yen, and then back in the opposite direction. So there had to be exchange rates between the national currencies and the ICU, and Keynes had proposals about varying that if you ran sustained trade surpluses and deficits and so on. But the internal mechanism was that once you've converted your currency into Bancor, if you ran a persistent trade deficit, you run an overdraft. But if you ran a persistent trade surplus, you'd have a credit in the account. The sum would be zero for every country. So adding up all countries around the world, the sum is zero, because that's the sum of all exports and imports. Okay? So now, if you're running a sustained surplus, Keynes, the system had a quota based on the sum of your exports and imports. Okay? So the bigger your economy, the more you exported and imported, the larger a quota you had. But once you exceeded, you could have some years in which you ran a surplus, other years you ran a deficit, fluctuate around. That would mean you would probably stay close to within reach of a zero balance overall. But countries who ran a persistent trade surplus would have a credit balance, and those running a persistent trade deficit would have a negative balance. The Keynes proposed, after they'd passed half their quota in terms of their balance, as a negative or positive, they'd have to pay interest.
Okay.
And that's both groups, same rate of interest. Whether you're running a surplus or a deficit, you got penalised if you did it in a sustained fashion. Okay? So that the interest was then transferred to what he called a reserve fund. Everything's called a reserve fund in economics. Makes the terminology hard to follow. But that reserve fund was then used as development aid for third world countries. And of course, if you give them, what would happen is the countries running trade imbalances, which is what the policy is trying to get rid of, would be the ones who would be paying for funds to go to third world countries. And those funds could only be spent buying goods from other countries. You can't use Bancor for internal trade.
Right.
So therefore, the interest rate payments would actually boost demand for the economy overall. So it was a very, very clever set of ideas. No, not a currency that can be created, so no worry about global inflation and, the World Economic Federation, whatever they call it, conspiracy theorists can go take a hike. There's no way there's had any global currency. And it had pressure to reduce trade deficits and surpluses, so you couldn't get the extreme policy that China's pulled off for the last 40 years, nor could you get America using its financial hegemony for other reasons that are destructive of both the rest of the world and America, the vampire squid effect. You could have cut that out, and you wouldn't have had the sustained divergence we've seen globally in terms of income standards and rates of growth and so on. So it would have been a fairer world, and if we could still bring it in now. The thing is, back, of course, at the end of World War II, there was plenty of reason for countries to say, let's not repeat the mistakes that led to World War I. Right. Okay, and World War II. So they'd work together in harmony. The one country that stuck out, guess which one?
Madagascar?
United States of America, mate. Okay, you guys shot the plan down. You wanted to be the the dominant country. You were running a surplus at the time.
Right.
For obvious reasons, thought, no, we're not going to get penalised. So Harry Dexter White, who's the personality involved here, heard the name before?
Yeah.
Good.
But I don't know much about him.
He's a fairly notorious character in terms of non-orthodox economics because he shot Keynes down at Bretton Woods. He also has an interesting history involving some liaisons with the Russians, which at the time lots of people were doing for progressive reasons at that time. So I'm not putting him down for that. But he's a complex character. But he was one who overruled Keynes. And we've got the American system tied to the dollar. Now, that lasted, 25 years before it fell over. Then we got the system with the American dollar, which was supposed to, work according to the Milton Friedmans of the world, and it hasn't. So, we need something sensible. And what Trump should do is adopt Keynes's plan, but he can rename the unit of account. Why not call it a Trump?
They might run with that. If they,
I know.
I've
I've got to do something to try to get the idea getting legs.
Right. The Bancor or the Donald.
No, please not the Donald. I'm happier with the Trump.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's a good place, I think, for us to wrap up. So, folks, I will link to Steve's article on this stuff and, maybe some other things in previous times I've had you on the show, Steve. So, as always, the international man of mystery, the breaker of hearts, the breaker of dogmas, Steve Keen, folks. Thanks, Steve, for joining us.
And thank you from the god of karaoke. Yeah. And impersonations.
All right. Thanks. Okay, folks, thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next time.
You've just experienced another episode of The Bob Murphy Show, the podcast promoting free markets, free minds, and grateful souls. For more information and to subscribe to this podcast, visit bobmurphyshow.com.